Do you understand who you're parenting? Do you sometimes look at your offspring and think, where did you come from? Or is your child so like you that it's spooky? Every child's unique. We all know that, and there are so many different things that affect who they are. One of this is their personality, and it's so important to understand because when you parent your child, you're coming from your own personality perspective as a parent, as well as all the other experiences you bring to the table. And now you and your child might be on the same page personality-wise, or you could be at opposite ends of the spectrum. Either way, knowing what makes your child tick can help them reach their full potential as a person on your parenting journey is really important for both you and them. Many years ago, when my children were 8 and 10 years old, we were in a family picnic in the park and all watching a toddler attempt to climb the biggest slippery dip in the playground. To our horror, he fell down the step onto a big block of concrete and lay there crying. I noticed our responses. Mine was, "Oh my goodness, poor child, I hope he's okay." I was concerned he might be injured and his caregiver wasn't around the place. So my first instinct was to run towards him. However, my thinking family's response was quite different. Almost in unison, they said, "Well, he shouldn't have been climbing that slippery dip. And where was his mother?" And Paul said, "Don't run over. His mother must be around the place somewhere, and it's her responsibility to look after him." How unfeeling, I thought. My heart was in my mouth. I was concerned about this poor child's well-being. However, my family's comments were logical and true. I didn't have to go and rescue the child, as his mother pretty quickly came after she heard him crying. And I should point out that my family did follow up their initial concerns with comments such as, "I hope he's okay." But their first response was not an emotional one. I, too, in retrospect, questioned the safety measures, height of the play equipment, and really, where was that child's caregiver? But that, again, wasn't my immediate thought. And it was there and then that I realised logical thinking was always going to be at the forefront of my family's thoughts. For each of them as thinking types, their first thought is why. And as a feeling type, my first thought is who. My family's feelings are always there and can be reached, but it may take a little bit of digging to bring out their empathy and sympathy. I've also learnt that my ability to feel instantly empathetic and desire to look after others at an emotional level can have my thinking family feel very overwhelmed, uncomfortable, and cynical. That actually goes for the many other thinkers in my life. The incident in the park was a real turning point for me in understanding thinking types. I realised that I'm actually living with them 24/7, and I have to put myself in my family's shoes. When I look at decision-making and other thought processes, I realise that it's up to me to change my reaction to their thinking language and not be hurt. They're not trying to be hurtful, just logical, critiquing, and straightforward. Now, this has enabled me to build a resilience around their language and be empathetic to their thoughts and those of other thinking types that I've met as I've moved through life. I constantly consider myself lucky to have a chance to learn this valuable lesson. It's freed me of my own personal perspective and expectations of others. I am a happier, more well-balanced person as a result. Although I don't usually agree with how they go about things, I now actually get it, and I do understand their decision-making process. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you with the ones you care about the most. Today we're talking to Jan Terkelsen, director and podcast host of People Leaders. Hi Jan, and welcome back.
Hi Kate, good to be here.
Last time we were discussing the MBTI parenting styles, and today we're looking at our children and their personalities and whether the knowledge of MBTI is a useful tool when bringing up our treasured offspring. So if you can just give me a quick review of what kind of parents you are, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So my husband is an introverted perceiver. So he is an INTP. So he's a thinker, a perceiver, an intuit, and also an introvert. Whereas I am an ENFJ. So I'm an extrovert, an intuit. I'm also a feeler, which was the opposite to my husband, and also a judger, which is also the opposite. So we have a bit of same, but different.
Yes. So when you're looking at those personality types, there are a lot of things that are quite different within them. And so therefore, today when we're talking about parenting our children, these different types can make a difference to how you parent and what you look for in your kids and what kind of kids you've got. So as parents, What was the earliest age you could pick out a dichotomy of the Myers-Briggs? What, whether they were thinking or feeling or whether they were extrovert, introvert? What was your first age?
I think that would have been once they became verbal. My daughter was an extrovert, like she, was speaking at 6 months and she was interacting and she loved that. And I remember it was a Mother's Day that she said "ma," and however, I didn't think about type at that young age, because I remember, when Carl Jung was saying we know that we're born with these preferences, but with children, they will grow into them. So I was really mindful of not trying to type them too early. However, yeah, definitely my daughter had those extroverted qualities. She would just chat away to anyone in the pram. She'd, reach out and wave, and she was, quite energetic. Whereas my son, who is an introvert, he is an ISTP. He loved to pull things apart. He loved to do the Lego, but just get lost in his own world. And like I remember, we would find him inside the dishwasher, like he'd pull all the inners out of the dishwasher and crawl in, because he'd love to pull things apart and then put them back together. And so I knew he was very different from my daughter, because she was more of that social interaction, whereas my son loved the mechanical interaction, the technical.
They're very true. My husband's an ISTP, and he doesn't actually put things together mechanically, but he's a fixer in emergencies of situations.
Yes.
So really interesting when you look at those perceptions, those types. So I've got an extrovert daughter and an introvert son as well. And so they're very similar. Cassie used to have so many friends over, and I'd be constantly inviting friends over for Jack, And one day he actually turned to me when he was about 12 and said, "Mum, I don't need friends like you." I was like, oh my goodness, here's me, all in full knowledge of everything really, but I'm still trying to get him a few friends along. He said, "I see them at school all day. I don't really need them at home."
Yeah.
There you go.
And really understanding the ISTP, they are a really interesting type. And because what I noticed with my son is that the loyalty aspect, like he was very loyal to people who were right in front of them. That was his loyalty. Whereas a feeler, I'm loyal to, even if they're not in the room, I'm still loyal. And I would think that was something wrong, but it's not. It's just different. And so again, as a parent, I've had to broaden my expectation about what's appropriate and what's right and wrong, and nothing's good or bad. It just is different.
Yes, it is. And it's really different. And my daughter, same thing, is that I have no feeling types in my family. So
Ouch.
I always say to people, I didn't have these tools, I would be a little ball in the corner. Like I would not have any resilience to any of the language that comes out of their mouths. They sit there and they all look at me and they go, "Really?" When I've made a feeling statement, "Really? Do you really think that way? I can't believe that you think that. You shouldn't be worrying about that other person." So I adjust as well. In fact, I'm the one that usually adjusts. So I do say to them sometimes, "Could you pull your empathy out of your backside and let's have a little talk about this?" And it doesn't mean, like we say, that thinking people have no empathy. It's just that their first thought is that logical thought, and our first thought is that feeling thought of caring about somebody. So it does make a really big difference in recognizing in your child. If I was without this tool, I think I would find my children so harsh, and I would think they were mean all the time.
Yeah. And I remember when we went on a family holiday, and I had this sense that my son didn't have empathy, because I didn't see it in his interactions. And we went away with our dog, and our dog got really sick, and we had to take it to the vet. And my son I've never seen him emotional before. And I went, "Oh my God, he's got empathy." You know what I mean? It took that for him to have it. And you can learn empathy. Like, empathy is also a skill that you develop, and it's such an important communication skill. And so, that's
and you can.
Yeah,
I have the most empathetic son. And my daughter as well. And often I watch them and they're beautiful with people. And sometimes I say to my daughter, "Oh my God, I'm so proud of you. You did so well." And she goes, "Yeah, really I wasn't feeling it. But if you can give it out, that's magnificent."
That's right. Yeah.
So what else did you notice, along the way? Because, with people with their children, for them to notice, it's really the things to look out for. What else did you notice next after your kind of introversion, extroversion?
Yeah, so I just noticed, well, the brevity part was also the introversion, but also the thinking. So with my son, instead of having a long conversation with him about something, I'd ask him a short, sharp question and expect a kind of like a brief answer and be okay with that. So instead of the question, how was your day at school, I would ask him a specific question about, who did you sit next to? Or what was what's one thing that you learned in science? Just one thing that he could kind of like get over and done with, the conversation and the interaction, and then we're kind of like, I have my sense of connection, because he definitely doesn't need it. As long as we're around, that was enough for him. So that was one of the things that I had to be mindful of. But the one thing I notice works with my son is if I ask him a question or something for him to solve. I'll say something like, actually, I'm not sure whether or not you could answer this, Tully, but do you know how the brackets work in such and such? And he lights up. So if he doesn't know it, he will research it. And this has been gold for me. Like, that's how I actually get him to, have a communication with me, is to solve a problem or to ask him something that he is really interested in.
Fantastic. Yeah, because he doesn't switch off then, does he? If the other stuff. So that's really important, to find something like that in your children and what really turns them on in that sense of answering and getting back to you. That's fabulous. And what about your daughter?
Yeah, so with my daughter, I just noticed that for her, the conversation was just so important. The way in which we're connected, the fact that she is an extroverted feeler, she had to, that was her sense of, that's where she gets her greatest value, is in those connections. So for me, it was just, and because I'm the same, it was pretty easy. And so for me, it was actually more important that I was focused on developing my repertoire with my son as opposed to my daughter, because it was easy to have the conversation with my daughter. It was easy to pull out what she'd done and the connections that she's made and the conversations that she's had, so much so that she would tell me too much information and I don't really need to know all that, things like that. So it was really about her needing to explore on her own. So, for example, she'd ask me a question and I'd ask her, do you want an answer or are you just kind of extroverting?
Yes.
And so that's the thing that I just had to be mindful of with her.
Many parents ask me, how do I talk to my kids? Do you struggle with this? How well do you really know your child? Knowledgeable communication is the key to successful bonding with your child. This is something I can help you with. I meet with parents all the time around this. So let's chat. Contact me at thepersonalitycoach.com.au. Yes, and I written in my book and say to my classes that Cassie and she'd come home with her homework and we would sit at the breakfast bar and we'd do it together because she wanted company and I'm really happy to be company. And our conversation would go to boys, it would go to what are you doing after school? And then I would bring it back in. Okay, now let's get back on with the work. And then it would divert again and it would go to something else, whereas my son would come in and he would just study quietly by himself. And when he'd finished his work, if he wanted me to check it over, he would just bring it out. Whereas for her and I, that conversation just had to keep going. And the thing is that if you are an introverted parent, you might never do that with your extroverted child because you don't realize how important speaking and talking sorts out the thoughts of the extrovert. So these are really important things to know as a parent. In that sense, and being able to pick those things out. How early did you define the JMP, the judging and perceiving part of their personality types?
When they, had to start cleaning their room and things like that. I never really had to ask my daughter to clean her room. She's very structured and organised and compartmentalised, whereas my son, not so much. Now, that's not to say that, perceivers can't be structured and organised. However, that's how it usually played out. Or, when they had to get things done for school, my daughter would start very early and she'd finish, before it was due, whereas my son, the night before. Now, that's also a gender thing and a male thing, but it's also a perceiving thing, that rush of energy right at the end, and that's where they do their best work. And I used to think that was wrong, and it's not.
No.
It's
what we do. We love it.
That's right.
It's fantastic.
Right.
You actually don't, and to tell the truth, people, it really, I cannot get my best thoughts together. I'm sitting there working on my work for today because that's where my best thoughts are coming. I've prepared everything because in life I've worked out that you really need a lot of preparation. So I prepare everything. But for my last minute inspiration will come just before the event. And as long as I know that and I'm open for that, then it all works. And that goes with all of my family, except my family. I've got, my son is the judging type, and I could pick him because at 3, his toy cupboard was so tidy that I would move things just to mess with his head, come out and go, "Oh, Mum, did you move my car?" "Oh, yes, I did," because I was fascinated, because I'd never dreamed that I would have a son that was like this, and at that early an age. And he's still very much the same. He went through the teen, slob part, but still very much organised and has to organise us. So as a family, we actually have to play to him, because we'll go, "Do you want to go to movies tonight?" "Yeah, let's go." And he'll be stressing because he has to brush his teeth and he has to get organised and he has to. So very young, very early in the piece, I used to say he'd be pretty screwed up adult if I hadn't known this stuff very early in the piece. And I knew to say to him, "Jack, we're going out in 15 minutes. I need you to get ready." So that's always my cue. If we rush him, he'll say, "You guys, you're rushing." He's 29 now. "You're rushing me." And we have to step back and go, "Yes, actually we are." Or we say, "Man up, people are really different. You just got to get moving fast sometimes, because this is the real world, Sometimes people are slower and not as fast as you like." But all of those things are really great skills for them to have. And my children actually use them all the time in their adult life. They have it in the back of their heads as well, because like you, they've probably drilled it in and what have you, just to look for in people. My daughter's got her own business and she uses it just the same way you were talking about with your business people. Works out who needs to be get back to immediately, who's the introvert, who's the extrovert. And my son uses it with his friendship groups and works out how to work those people in his life. So do your kids use theirs much at all in an obvious way, or?
Yeah, my daughter definitely, she used to coordinate our podcast and was our EA, and then she's moved on to other things now. But yeah, she definitely has used the Myers-Briggs in conversing, responding, but also the amount of information that she knows people would like, even in her salutations. So she gets to know certain clients. Certain clients would like a real, a salutation and "How was your weekend?" Whereas other clients just get straight into the detail. So she was good like that. And my son, I suppose he uses it. So he was working construction and things like that. And it was interesting how much he actually was using it without him knowing that he was using it. And It just allowed him to be a little bit more understanding about why people react the way they do, so whether or not they were more of a feeling type or whether or not they were very, structured in their approach. And it actually allowed him to have a little bit more flexibility in the way in which he interacts with them. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. Jan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun. I really love talking to people about this stuff. It's really been great, and I hope that anyone listening will enjoy it just as much. You'll find Jan's details about her company, People Leaders, and her podcast in the show notes. So if anyone's in business, then this could be a very, Jan's details could be very valuable to you. And Jan, once again, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, Kate.
Many parents say that one of the best ways to cope with the battles of parenting is to hear it from other parents and understand what's going on within their lives as they go through similar challenges. In this scenario, personality typing can be a unique form of support for parents. As we begin to look at type, the challenges of parenting, although innately human, do take different shapes depending on our type. For example, the empathetic, introverted big-picture feeling person, perceiver, the INFP, can struggle with coming to terms with the reality of bringing children into a troubled world. Meanwhile, the go-getting ENTJs, the extroverted, big-picture thinking, organised types, can be more concerned about how to achieve the ultimate level of success, both at work and home. I'm hoping this podcast opened the door for people to examine and explore how we can each use our own unique talents to raise happy, loving, successful children, and for us to grow in the process. I'm Kate Mason, and thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my newly launched book, Who is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.